So welcome to the Adjutant's headquarters building. Originally, that's what this building was. This is where the military did all of their paperwork. So today, rightfully so, we use this as our main museum building. So when you enter into this building, you get a chance to step back into time, and you're entering where all the offices for the military were as they did all those reports and paperwork. Now, behind me, this is one of the chimneys, and you can see that there is a little bit of deterioration. That's one of the projects that when we look for funding is to go ahead and to restabilize some of the buildings. That includes the fireplaces, the hearths, adobe walls, you name it, all kinds of things. So when you're literally going through this building, this is 151 years of history. This right here is a miniature model of what the fort looks like. 55 acres with 22 buildings initially. You're standing in this building right here, which is the Adjutant's headquarters building. And then across the street, those are the homes that you would have gone through, including the homes along Officers Row. The rest of these buildings over here, the enlistment barracks buildings, those are no longer here because when people moved out here, they needed lumber, so they started tearing some of those down. Now, a little bit of history. Most people don't realize 90% of the guys that were stationed out here were actually enlisted men, or the infantry. Corrals and stables would have been over here with the hay pile and the lumber pile. This is a lovely photo that was painted by one of the locals here in Camp Verde, local artists, and she came to one of the Buffalo Soldiers event and was so moved that she donated this painting. During the recession in 2008, I was the only full-time employee. So for 8 years, if I didn't have volunteers, I would not have been able to stay in this job. But I ran it for 8 years as the only full-time employee. So I had a lot of experience in doing all the different tasks because firsthand I did it. And so I got a chance to know exactly what it takes to run the park on a shoestring budget. Mostly because my degree is in recreation management, so I had the criteria that you needed for being a manager. Why I stayed is because it ties into my favorite thing about this park. This is the history, and these walls, when you walk through these buildings, the walls were made of adobe, which is clay, silt, and sand. It's just a mud mixture. So when the soldiers were out here, the hands that made those bricks, that took the piles of dirt, sifted out the rocks, made these bricks, they made these walls. And so when you literally come to Fort Verde, you get a chance to walk through there's 4 original adobe buildings. So you actually get to walk through the footsteps of those that lived here. And this is one piece of Arizona's history that hasn't been destroyed, fortunately, knock on wood. It does crack a little bit because of the adobe, but you literally get to walk through the original footsteps. And so you get a chance to feel what life was like for those that lived out here. It was a harsh life. You know, you basically did more with less. And so even the walls, if you think about it, you know, they made these walls brick by brick. So that's one of my favorite things, you know, about the fort.
And this is for a great opportunity that was bestowed upon me and by Sheila when I came to visit the fort. She's asked if I would volunteer and why. Indian presence at the fort will help preserve the accuracy of history here. And one of the things that we found out very, very quickly is that what was written by like the U.S. Army or so forth, so on, there was big differences or discrepancies versus the Hollywood presentation of Indians, cowboys, miners versus the Indians, how that falls into place. We found out that there were 2 sides to a story.
Whether people agree with the history or not, because of obvious reasons why the military were here, the thing is this is a historic site, and the story needs to be told not only for not just the military perspective, but for the Native American perspective.
An example, only one time did Geronimo actually give his narration of his own story. However, what you get to read is what was already censored by the U.S. Army before it was allowed to be published.
Those volunteers motivated me to be able to stay in my job, and they gave some of the help that I needed to go ahead and to help to keep the park open. But the town of Camp Verde stepped up too, and they said, you know what, this piece of history means the world to us, and so we will do whatever we can to help out.
This gives you a chance to develop an empathy for these people and come to realize that they made mistakes, but so do we. And what they did in many, many instances is worthy of memory.
Well, things have changed a lot since I started in 2003, I'll tell you that much. So, pay scales, for example, definitely everything is completely different from 2003. Whether you're a seasonal ranger, a full-time park ranger 2, a park ranger 3, assistant manager, or manager, we all do the same thing. It's a team effort. So cleaning the bathrooms, opening the buildings, running special events, greeting customers every day, we do payroll here, timesheets, evaluations, everything, the volunteer program, and that's all coordinated with a group effort. So no matter what your title is, we all do a little bit of everything.
Well, I've always wanted to be a park ranger. In my first thoughts, my park ranger experience was maybe like the Yogi Bear or the Boo Boo type scenario, but when I applied for park rangers, I didn't know what I was really getting into because I had no experience before this. Before this, I had been a licensed pest control applicator. So I was doing that for about 6 years. So I didn't want to do that any longer.
I graduated from college and the bills hit and student loan was finally like, hey, you gotta pay for this. So I ended up going into finance. I got a job at a credit union and then kind of did the whole credit union, mortgage, title work, that sort of thing. And when we moved down to Arizona, which was basically 6 months ago, I got another job at a credit union. Just thought, well, okay, at least you'd be able to be hired for that, I would think. I had the experience in it. And then, like I said, I saw this for the park ranger and thought, well, maybe it's a midlife crisis, I don't know. But I thought, I'll apply for it because it's something I've always wanted to do.
I started out as a ranger historian at this park. I did that for 8 years. Then I went to work for the State Historic Preservation Office, Arizona State Historic Preservation Office, as an architectural historian. Fascinating job. Couldn't stand Phoenix. So I applied to be the park manager here, got that job and did it for 10 years. So I've got a total of 18 years here at Fort Verde. After that, I joined the National Park Service in California for 18 years. Moved back here a couple years ago as a retiree, and I beat feet down here to Fort Verde to see if they had any use for me. And they said very nicely, yes, we do. And what I do is living history interpretation. Living history. When I get fully into all of my gear, excuse me, I just came in from the field and I'm going to get back in uniform. Okay, now I'm legal. This is field hat. The idea is that by wearing the clothes and doing the things the individual in 1875 or whenever the year is, I become conversant with both the mindset and everything about the person. For example, to find out what it was like to be a foot soldier here at Fort Verde, I once, in full gear, including my musket and everything else, walked from here to Phoenix one summer, just to find out what it was like.
I'm a volunteer and I have sharing my lineage. I am the great-great-grandson of the legendary Geronimo, which you're going to have to come to one of my presentations because that really is not an Indian name. Geronimo is not, but he adopted it, and there's a great story on the battle for which he adopted that name. Goyakla is his original baby name, which means he who yawns. Oh. He was named, or renamed, I should say, when he was at the age of 13 or 14, after his fourth successful raid. He went from being a brave to becoming a warrior, and he was renamed by Cochise at that time, And his name there is Goyathle. I don't share what that means. You'll have to know. This particular ensemble that I'm wearing, or regalia, is more what we use when we went to battle. Because you might be in the dirt and the pebbles and the sagebrush among the cactus, etc. We were able to hide because we could burrow, cover ourselves, and be totally invisible. We weren't magicians, we just didn't get, but they thought we were magicians because we would suddenly come out of the ground out of nowhere. Indians, especially the Apaches, were adaptable, quick adapters. They went from stone knives to steel knives. They went from bow and arrows and lances to using firearms, quite accurately, I might add. Geronimo, my great-great-grandfather, had this as his favorite weapon. You would think it would have been the Winchester 30-30, but it wasn't. It was okay. He liked this one because it had a long range. In his words, he would say, if I could take high ground and I could see that dot, I could take it out. And this was the weapon that he would use.
When I am being John Mason, my persona as a hospital steward, my mindset is in that mindset. And I talk as I would because people want to have the interaction with another live human being who just happens to be from 1887 or whenever. They know I can't be 140 some odd years old, but they're willing to set aside their sense of reality in order to relate to a person from another time and place. This is, to me, the most important thing I can do, is let them walk in somebody else's shoes and, tell the unvarnished story. All the equipment I wear is fully functional. I have my emergency field surgical kit right here. I am pretty good at sewing you up. If you get seriously injured, I do have morphine tablets, and I do have a bottle of laudanum. Other than that, you're out of luck. Once my command is out in the field, I'm the only medical source they have, period, end of discussion. These people were tough, but I have an admiration for the men and women who were at forts like Fort Verde. Fort Verde is a typical military post of the period. It gives them a chance to experience the life. That's what all these things are for.
Daily duties would be, just telling people about the area, telling people about the fort here, telling them, what happened here, getting them out to enjoy things. Hopefully I get to play a little era dress up and do that part and help, explain what's going on and have that whole thing versus being in this wardrobe all the time. I could be in the era wardrobe and show people how they, how they lived at this time.
The difference is I am a full-time employee. As opposed to a park ranger one, they are pretty much a seasonal employee. They have a limited amount of hours they can work for that season. I did begin as a 1. I advanced to a park ranger 2. As other parks do need the help, I do go out and help out the other parks. Jerome State Park, Tonto Natural Bridge State Park, and Slide Rock State Park as well.
But so basically, as a state park ranger, State Parks falls underneath the umbrella of ADOA, which is Arizona Department of Administration. So they are the mothership, if you will. So basically, Fort Verde is one of 28 state parks, and we fall under the umbrella of state parks. State Parks falls under the umbrella of ADOA. Our executive director is appointed by the governor's office, so at the pleasure of the governor. So that's kind of the hierarchy of how it goes. So we have our executive director who reports to the State Parks Board, and then we have then there's like the executive staff, and then regional manager for North Region, for West Region, and Southern Region, and then the individual park managers for each park. So that's kind of our jurisdiction. We fall under the northern region, and our regional manager is David Jordan.
Every morning, before I come into the office here, I check the restrooms out to make sure there's no water leaks, broken windows, pick up trash in the mornings around the restroom area. Check the parade ground out front there, make sure pick up the trash in the immediate area around the restroom area. Then I come over to this here at the administration building and turn off the alarm. I check the emails, make sure the flags are flying high, full staffed, of course. And then I proceed to open the opening procedures, which turning on equipment, turning the lights on, getting the day ready to go, the till set up, opening the buildings across the street, checking for fingerprints, which they do pop up quite a bit, sweeping out the buildings, address any issue that we have as every night. Some creatures do deposits, so those have to be picked up or corrected.
There's always going to be stabilization issues, and so it's just a matter of being on top of it. I'm one of those people, I don't like to wait until there's a big hole in the wall. I document and take pictures of all the different cracks and everything that's going on, so that management above me is aware of all of the issues that are going on. Because if you wait until that point, then you could lose your entire historic site. And so, it takes a lot of work, but we have all of our rangers, when they go through, everybody's trained to look for safety issues. If they see something that hasn't been reported, we document it and make sure that upper management knows that we need to get some funding. That's the biggest challenge, would be the funding to make all of these improvements that need to be made to just make the buildings, keep them standing, keep them stabilized.
The level of workmanship that went into these buildings was phenomenal. These buildings are set on stone trenches about 2 feet wide, 2 feet deep, that have been packed solid with stone. And then, above grade, the adobe walls go up from there. Now, the adobe basically was not brick. They did make bricks for some fill-in areas, but generally speaking, they used what was called pice. I don't know if you're familiar with it. You build a wooden frame, maybe 6 feet long, 2 feet wide, and about 2 feet deep. And you fill it and pack it with adobe mud. And you just pack it, the daylights out of it. You let it sit there until it's dry. You knock the frame off and you rebuild it on top. Only you do it off-center so that you are in effect building the building out of very, very large bricks. It hangs together magnificently. Adobe is a natural material. It's an insulator. It keeps you cool in the summer, warm in the winter. There was one set of plans, and when you found out you were going to go build a fort, you would be issued a set of plans. This is what these specific buildings should look like, how they're put together. Well, the people who built the 3 two-story officers' quarters here at the park, the fort, they were apparently from Germany, and they used a technique that in German is called Fasching, where you build a frame building and then you infill between the frame with adobe brick. And then you plaster the whole thing. These buildings are kind of amazing at how well they've stood up. This post was abandoned in 1891. The local folks basically tore down 21 of the buildings for building materials. But these buildings on Officers Row were purchased, by the way, if you wanted to buy part of Fort Verde in 1898, every building on the block for 25 bucks. So they became private residences. The administration building is kind of an aberration because it is not holding up well, because it wasn't built with the finesse that these buildings were.
Really, when you go back to the basics, if an adobe wall is cracking, what do? You have to fix it. How do you fix it? There's a number of different ways. The National Park Service has preservation briefs out there about how to fix adobe. Typically, our agency has always contracted out an adobe specialist because they know exactly what needs to be done to do it. But to me, it's mind-blowing that 150 years ago, they just had a big wheelbarrow of dirt. They added their water and clay, silt, and sand and mixed it up, and that's how they did it back then. So we could learn something from them, I think.
Jerry came over to one of the shows we were having here in the park, over at school, the old school gym. And he saw my moccasins and said, "Can you make me a pair of high tops?" And I said, "Sure." So, and then I've always tried to be authentic. So I went to bison hide for the soles and insoles, and elk for the uppers, and it's all hand sewn and hand punched. We sat down on the top, and to me, when you talk to someone, you get the history of what they are and what they want. And so I made a pair with the fringes first, and then he came to me earlier this year and said, in March, and he said, "Can you make me a pair that are the warrior type moccasins?"
He was not only a great craftsman, but he used authentic material and did it in the authentic, for real, original ways. These are built as they were built by the natives themselves. The moccasins that you will find in the photographs that I got to start with were the ceremonial moccasins. Those are ones with fringes. Those are we use for ceremonials such as weddings, or the baby's first moccasins when they first, or other festivities, festivities. There's different ones. These are the moccasins that were worn on a daily basis. These were every day. Now, anyone who wore moccasins also carried with them soles and the thread. These usually lasted at least a good year. The authenticity of this is totally accurate because he got all of these from both of the historical pictures, and of course he put that all together. They are totally comfortable. I would call myself a tenderfoot, okay? Rocks, pebbles, not a problem. I mean, it's just like floating on air.
I walk out in my field out on my home, and we're all aware of what bullhead is. And I picked up bullhead, but nothing came through. So you just take your knife, and scrape, and all the bullheads come up, and you just keep walking.
I call them goat heads. Yeah, bullhead, goat heads. Yeah, Don, we know they hurt.
I'm still learning after 19 years. And the reason I don't get bored is my favorite thing about this job is preserving history, but also the interaction with people and the stories that you hear, the untold stories. What's interesting about Fort Verde is you never know who you're going to meet. Literally, we have descendants of, like, say, Cuvier Grover, the family that actually came through our front door. And what's amazing is we had a person that I met, and she had the exact same cheekbones and the nose structure, and I couldn't figure out where I had met her before. And then she told me later on, she said, well, my great-great-great-grandfather served at Fort Verde. And she told me the story of Cuvier Grover, who's this gentleman right here. And literally, what ended up happening was his wife and him came out here, and she died on the way out here. And so the grandparents took custody of the grandson because they kind of blamed him for their daughter dying on the way out here because it was such a harsh journey. So what happened was they took custody of their grandson, they changed his last name to Flint, and the person who had come through the fort was the great-granddaughter of that same family. Then 3 years later, a gentleman walks through with the same exact last name, Flint, and I looked at him and I said, are you related to so-and-so? And he's like, well, that's my daughter. How did you meet her?
100% pretty much on-the-job training. It's, yeah. I came in with knowledge of outdoor landscaping per se. But other than that, everything about the fort I would have to learn. I did have to learn, which is great. I'm still learning. The favorite part of my job would be just dealing with the people from around the world. The different accents, educating the people about this park here, what they are here to come see. Getting dressed up and representing the park, it's very great. This is a great place to work. It's such a small, fun park. There's just really nothing bad about it.
If you have the passion and if you're interested in anything, whether it's a recreation park or a historic park, I'd say go for it. You know, just try it. And the thing is, you never know until you try. The worst thing you can do is just not try and say, well, I don't have the experience. But if you at least try, and then you can say, yes, this is for me, or no, it isn't. Sometimes we try to tell people this is a historic site, and no matter how many times you tell them, they think, I'm going to be working in the Smoky Mountains, I'm going to be hiking trails and trees, and they see our parade ground, they go, whoa, it's a historic park. You know, so the thing is, it's not everybody's cup of tea, but the thing is that if you do like history even a little bit, it's a jewel of a park, and you never know until you try. And if you don't know the history, you can learn the history. The passion is the part that's hard to, you know. So if somebody has a little bit of passion, especially when little kids, when they come and do our Junior Ranger program, we always like to say, guess what? Someday we might retire, and we need you to step up. And literally, I've had a number of Rangers, they're like, Mom, can I work here? And to me, that just melts my heart, because it just means that we're doing what we're supposed to do. We're instilling the passion, and we're trying to show kids that there's more to life than just what you see on TV. There's, right, when you get off the couch, when you get into the outdoors, when you get into a historic park, literally, you can dream big. There's a lot of really cool things that are out there. And that's what our job is as a Junior Ranger, is to show the public, educate the public, but to give them an experience that they cannot recreate.
Well, ranger work is more of a serious job. If you want to be a ranger, you got to be committed. You cannot just get in just to get your foot in a door. You got to devote yourself to it. It's more of a lifetime job rather than just a temporary job situation. So if you would really want to become a park ranger, you study quite a bit on what your goals are for that particular park. Every particular park has got its own different, per se, themes as to this park here. But study that park, decide what you really are looking for when you're going to get your education, and pursue that education as you enter the real world of work.
My advice would just be try it, give it a whirl. If you have an interest in it, there's that old thing, if you do something you love, you never work a day in your life. I say try it. What I look forward to the most would just be the interaction with people that come in, finding out where they're from, why they're here, helping them, learn the history of the area, always giving them other ideas of where else they could go, because when I travel, I like people who do that too. Like, hey, have you checked out this? Have you checked out this? You're on your way this way. Don't forget that.
I've been a historian for 55 years. And for those who are contemplating becoming historians, you don't become wealthy being a historian. It's one of the most underpaid jobs there is. You do it because you have a passion for it. If you think getting into history as a major or something like that is going to be a meal ticket or a free ride, you're in history for the wrong reason. The other thing, you've just had something of a demonstration of what living history is all about. To some degree, you have been willing to set aside the idea that I am not a hospital steward from 1887. But you have listened to what I had to say. There's an old saying which goes, what I hear, I forget. What I read, I remember. What I do, I understand. That's what my goal as a living historian is all about. To learn by doing, teach by doing. And one final thing. History is the most poorly taught subject in school. History is not memorizing names, dates, and places. History is people. The bottom common denominator is you, the individual persons. That's why I make studies of almost every man who served here, because their story deserves to be told. I look at the men and women who came out here to the American Siberia, and they not only put up with it, they did it with grace. Fort Verde was my baby. Of all the places I've worked in 55 years, Fort Verde is the one that means the most to me.
The one thing that you always hear different people with historic sites, and they say, how come this was torn down? How come this didn't survive? And the one thing I'd like for, I think it's important for people to know is this, by people coming here, this is what is preserving history. The minute people stop coming and they say, well, how come this place didn't survive? Well, it's because you didn't show up. You gotta show up. And if you show up and you do your part, if everybody does their part, then you can preserve Arizona's history, whether it's here, whatever part of the state. But when people don't show up or they don't care, then that's when you lose your history. So it's just real important for people, if they want to protect historic sites, they've got to step up, they got to show up, and they got to do their part.